So as we understand it, a model is any representation of a system, ideally capturing its main feature. Being a representation, of course, it has its limitation. An integrated assessment model is a mathematical tool that integrates knowledge from various disciplines like economics, environmental science, energy, agriculture, social science, etc., to evaluate complex global issues. For this reason, and IAM is particularly interesting when talking about climate change, energy, sustainability in general. All IAMs have limitations that might be intrinsic to the way we want to represent reality. So for example, the world and the system of the world we live in is not an exact system governed only by math equations. Of course, it's much more complex than that. But that's our way to represent reality, is an approximation. And that's the first limitation of IAMs in general. However, more specifically, each model is constructed in a different way. So depending on the time you can spend on it, the number of people working on it, the number of modules or the sectors in which the model is divided, it's subdivided to represent the reality. So it's two ways. One is more intrinsic and the way the IAMs are constructed, and the other is the process of constructing that model. So the William model have several features that generally are difficult to be found in other mainstream models, such as, for example, I can tell you about the feedback of the economy with the physical world, or the feedback of the climate module with the economy and the physical world as well. So it's basically the interlinkage of how the climate affects the economy and the physical world and vice versa. But also several other feedbacks that generally are not considered in most IAMs, let's say. And although RethinkAction bases its work mostly on local case studies, we found interesting to understand the possible effects of single policies on a different scale. For example, EU level or even global level. What happens if we apply one specific policy that we found interesting at local level, but what happens if we apply it at the global level? What are the possible consequences at a global scale or even at a European scale? Differently from a global model, which of course it's being global, it includes the whole world. In the case of a local system dynamic models, some of the challenges are the understanding of the local system and mostly which are its boundaries. So that's something that creates some sort of frame in which we include all the interesting features that are interesting for the project. The other challenge is related to the data. For this type of models, we need let's say a substantial amount of data to be able to simulate the system. So the collection of the local data is always a challenge, mostly because local data sets sometimes are missing or are scarce. So that's another important factor. And I can think about another challenge, which is to construct the model in such a way that local stakeholders can actually take advantage of it and be useful for them. Local models are built with the idea in mind to be useful somehow. Specifically in RethinkAction project, we aim to create models that are specifically useful to local stakeholders and policymakers. So connecting to that, in the RethinkAction project, we simulate the application of specific policies at local levels, and those policies are called Land Use-Based Adaptation and Mitigation Solution, or LAMS. And so we simulate the effect of those LAMS to understand what can happen, what are the consequences of applying such policies at local level. To be specific, LAMS are any type of policies, mostly based on land use land use implementation of some specific activities or implementation of practices that are aiming at mitigate the effect of climate change and adapt to climate change effects. As far as local models are concerned, we are advanced in the building of the model, and we are collecting essential data to run the simulations. LAMPs have already been developed in a previous work package, and now they need to be adapted to each case study. As for the William model, it is already completed, and the work in RethinkAction is focused on adapting the LAMPs to the global case by somehow adding pieces to the model, to the William model, and looking for essential data to simulate them.